Good morning. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Audit Committee for April 24th, 2023. I'm Lene Palmisano, and I'm the chair of this committee. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify a quorum.
Committee Member Payne.
Present.
Koski.
Present.
Singleton.
Present.
Albeni.
Present.
Vice Chair Fisher.
Present.
Chair Palmisano.
Present.
There are 6 members present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we have a quorum. Colleagues, our agenda is before us. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries and the agenda is adopted. Next, we have acceptance of the minutes from our regular meeting of February 6th, 2023. May I have a motion to accept those minutes?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? That carries and the minutes are accepted. Next, we'll move on to new business. We'll start with the staff presentation for the 2023 Enterprise Risk Assessment, which we've been hearing about for a while now. Welcome, Director Patrick.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, committee members. Today, you will have 2 presentations in front of you on the risk assessments. One is the traditional enterprise risk assessment we conduct every year to help build our audit plan, and the second is the community safety focused risk assessment. These will be the primary presentations today. There's a lot of material there, but they create the underlying force that is the audit plan for the coming year. Decided to split those into 2, and we will have a variety of presenters coming up. Our audit team has grown in leaps and bounds actually this year. So I want to give each member who's worked on specific components of the risk assessment an opportunity to come up and present those, introduce themselves, and meet the audit committee again for those you haven't met. So first, we'll go through the background of how we conduct our risk assessment. We are required to use independent objective assessment of governance, risk management, and control processes to evaluate how the city is functioning, identify those areas where there is significant underlying risk, and that will allow us to efficiently deploy our audit resources to those areas most deserving. We use the framework established by the Institute of Internal Auditors, their professional practices framework, to do our risk assessment. We're considering all these key controls in various important areas as we go about conducting interviews, surveys, industry research, national trends, discussions with audit staff around the country. So we try and take in a very broad array of information, apply the framework to it to determine what areas we think are in most need of audit attention. So all City of Minneapolis programs are included in this. That includes the Park and Recreation Board and their programs. We consider the budget. Obviously, if there's a high dollar amount associated with an activity, then there's some significant risk there. The nature of the activity, though, I think in the government sector is really one of the most important factors. Is what we're doing carrying a huge amount of inherent risk? If so, even if it were a smaller dollar amount, it does merit audit attention. There are multiple kinds of risk, and some areas just have more than others. Prior audit coverage also plays a role. We try and spread audit coverage across the city. We don't want to just focus exclusively in one area, so we want to make sure that we're hitting a diverse array of programs in our work. We rate risk in terms of likelihood, severity, and velocity. So likelihood, is how common would an event be that would present the risk situation and cause some issues. The severity, if something goes wrong, how significant would it be? How disruptive would it be to the city enterprise? And velocity, how quickly is something changing? You think about velocity in the context of the IT sector. Things are changing rapidly overnight in terms of risk, programs, things that we're doing, versus other activities with the city that are more stable and don't change much over time. Velocity can create a bigger risk event when things are changing that quickly. We consider mitigation efforts, so thinking about perhaps like finance, for example, has its own risk and controls team working in it, so that's a mitigation effort that they use internally to address risk. We consider those in how we deploy our audit resources, as they do reduce some of the inherent risk to their function. And just to be clear, the goal, we can never eliminate risk in its entirety. That's not possible, and nor would we necessarily want to, because with risk comes opportunity. You can't be necessarily safe in doing the same thing over and over again. We want to make sure those opportunities are there. We can't eliminate it in its entirety, but we can help manage it so that the city maintains a healthy risk level. And that's what deploying audit resources is all about. To talk some about the risk management processes and some enterprise impacts, I'm going to invite Allison up to discuss.
Chair Palmisano, committee members. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about risk management, the process, and enterprise risk management. Auditors are uniquely positioned to serve as risk specialists on each engagement to help management identify risks and approaches to strengthening the control environment. However, internal audit serves as a third line of defense in that it provides independent and objective assurance and advice on the adequacy and effectiveness of governance and the risk management framework. Internal audit's independence from the responsibilities of management, including risk management, is critical to its objectivity, authority, and credibility. Internal audit can provide consulting services to foster risk assessment as long as it's not actually involved in managing the risk. Senior management serves as the first line of defense by leading and directing day-to-day risk management decision-making, identifying, assessing, mitigating, and monitoring risks, and effectively implementing a risk management framework, including reporting and escalation. Senior management also serves as the second line of defense by reviewing and challenging the first line of defense, providing oversight of the risk tolerance and risk appetite of the organization, developing the risk management framework, providing independent reporting and escalation, and providing specialized advice and training. We do want to note that some City of Minneapolis departments and boards do have risk management processes, and a risk manager position exists in the finance department, which maintains an internal control system. Teams, I should say. However, the city does not have an integrated enterprise risk management program to date. Such a framework can help strengthen the organization's preparedness for crises and increase resilience to risk following a crisis by continually identifying opportunities to be more effective in the future. As an ERM program matures, there is greater potential to use it as a management tool that gathers data to better drive organization leaders' decision-making processes. So to conclude on this section, internal audit's annual risk-based assessment process could be more impactful should it have reference to a city-integrated ERM framework from which enterprise data could be analyzed. As the risk environment becomes more complex and emerging risks continue to represent potential higher impacts and likelihoods, the City of Minneapolis may explore implementation of an integrated ERM framework championed by a chief risk officer position that helps the city understand its holistic exposure to risks that impact its mission, strategic goals, and objectives and operations. And I'll turn it back over to City Auditor.
Thanks. I neglected to introduce Allison Newman. She is one of our senior auditors with the City Auditor's Office, so she'll be back up for other items. So yes, enterprise risk management, very important. As an audit shop, we can only do so much to analyze risk every year. This is another perhaps value add in the future years in the city. So we're going to walk through each of the key findings in some detail, but you can see here are the variety of things that we came across during our risk assessment. And we'll start with cybersecurity. This isn't new. This is something that pops onto the plan every year. I don't know if we'll ever mitigate risk to the point of where this won't be a top risk for the enterprise. It's just not possible given the velocity and the nature of the work itself. So we've seen some pretty significant ransomware attacks of late, both in the schools and other jurisdictions and municipalities have been hit with severe ransomware attacks that can impact all sorts of systems, take down the city's ability to do work, and are quite costly to remediate. We have one proposed engagement related to this, and it's actually us consulting and just being a helpful facilitator. IT is engaging in a holistic enterprise risk assessment for their cybersecurity systems. That project is in the works, and we will be there to serve as kind of audit consultants as they go about doing that with a vendor. So this is a really important first step in addressing cybersecurity, is to find those specific gaps and work to plug them. Can't do it unless you have that kind of specialized skill to see where those risks lie. So staffing and resourcing, again, on the audit plan from last year, this looks familiar, I imagine, as the risk hasn't necessarily changed. In our conversations with the leaders and staff around the city, it's still clear that staffing is significantly impacting the city's ability to achieve its goals. A lot of departments are running with significant staffing deficits, and burnout and retention issues are further causing issues. So this is a concern that was expressed across the entire enterprise and park board. So everybody's feeling the pinch of employees leaving the city and the challenge in replacing them in the current labor market. Recruiting, hiring, and reputational damages have certainly made it harder for the city to fill those gaps. That increases the workloads for existing employees, and employees take knowledge with them when they leave. We don't have a new audit proposed for this. We do have an enterprise culture assessment that's currently on the plan to be done in the future, and we did just do the hiring and promotions audit, and it'll take time for that to be implemented and to really feel the effects of it. So there's no new items for the plan, just the remaining carryover item from last year.
Mr. Patrick, did you want us to wait until the end of this presentation to ask questions, or should we be interrupting?
Chair Palmisano, please feel free to ask questions throughout.
Mr. Fisher has a comment or a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Patrick, we've seen this before, as you say, it was in the 2022 report, and I think we've seen evidence of it even before that there's staffing and resourcing issues. Do we have any evidence that it's improving, even though it's still an issue?
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, some departments did report that that staffing has become somewhat easier to recruit applicants. It's more anecdotal than borne out by the evidence, but it does appear that the market is somewhat improving for employees. Kind of across the board, though, it was clear that application numbers are down. So even if they are able to fill positions, posting that might have gotten 75 applicants is now getting 25 applicants. So yes, seats are getting filled, but there are bigger constraints on our ability to recruit and hire than there were in the past. So I did not get the sense that across the board things were improving. Some areas have, others are still dealing with this. And it's one of those compounding problems where as fewer people work in a specific area, pressure builds on those who stay, and future losses happen. So
Right.
it might take some time for us to get out of this current situation. Hopefully the remediation efforts for the hiring and promotions audit help, and then conducting the culture risk assessment may also be a good indicator of where we're at and how we can boost retention specifically.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to invite up Kamlin Alade to talk about our fleet management efforts. Kamlin is a senior auditor with the department. He's been here for quite some time. You may recognize him, but he will be discussing fleet management today.
Welcome, Mr. Alade.
Thank you. Chair Parmesan, committee members, I'm going to talk a little bit about the CD fleet management. And back in 2018, the fleet service redesigned their fleet management, and that time AOD committee approved a OD plan that include a consultation with a fleet service. So that when they implementing that, we discussed with them and we just postponed that consultation and to come back later and assess the new the new model they implement that time. So come COVID, and we put that to the side and got different priority. And we see that is by the time to go back and assess the new model they implement. On top of that, we have some kind of challenges on the fleet management nationwide, including the supply chain disruption. So they are not having when they order part to maintain the equipment, they are not getting part on time, and we think that on top of those challenges, we want to go back and assess the fleet management and the citywide fleet management. And we propose on that one audit, citywide fleet service audit, to assess a design and internal control and processes relating to the management of the city's fleet. So we've been seeing some kind of challenges in the resident area calling 311 and they not providing service on time. So the 311 is not responsible for those, but they pass on the public work. So we want to go and see that if it's not fleet management affecting those kind of service to the community as well. So that will be the fleet one. You don't have any question about it? Thank you.
Wait, I'm sorry, we do have one. Mr. Alade, Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, have you seen any indication of improvements in the supply chain, particularly on the fleet services side?
Madam Chair, Committee Member Payne, I think there's a little bit improvement in supply chain. A little bit, I don't say it's not, that might still, the disruption is still there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, to talk about facilities management and repair, I'm going to invite Nikita Lane up. Nikita is one of our newer, although she's been here for a year at this point, one of our auditors who's going to describe our section on our facilities.
Welcome, Ms. Lane.
Chair Palmisano, Audit Committee, good morning. I'm here to talk about aging facilities that create risk that may require costly maintenance and repairs. Aging facilities is a common condition in major cities, and like other municipalities in the state, the city is experiencing buildings that are in a state of disrepair. Repairs may be needed to resolve some issues. However, some buildings are older and may become inoperable. Aging buildings may impact city staff and their ability to serve our residents. Because of these risks, the city would benefit from a strategic plan to help navigate repairs and help mitigate the risks associated with increasing costs needed to restore critical facilities. Audit has identified an opportunity to review the city's facilities to ensure they are properly maintained and propose one project, the Aging Facilities Maintenance Audit, Phase 1. And our objective will be to review the effectiveness and efficiency of controls around the city's facilities maintenance and repairs.
So I'm curious if to say a little bit more about this. One thing that Councilmember Koski and I actually came into understanding a little bit was simply how a work order gets processed, right? In the example that we were given, it was about fire stations and an enormous backload of work orders and how they get lost in the system. Is it reasonable to assume that every different department of our city has a different process for managing those property maintenance work orders, or are they all the same? Are they standardized, or is that maybe one of the things that we're looking at doing through this project?
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, that is certainly the maintenance reporting system is one of the things that we'll be looking at extensively in this review. So that is a question to be answered, but based on conversations, that we had during the risk assessment, that should be part of the audit.
Okay. And do we have a sense of how many different facilities are we looking at through this audit? How many different city facilities are there roughly?
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, for this audit, you hear about it in the enterprise risk assessment. This portion of it, you'll also see something similar mirrored in the community safety focused risk assessment. So there are a number of buildings that the city maintains. There are quite a few facilities that in the community safety branch they maintain. So it's going to cover, we're going to work together across those lines. I don't have a specific number in mind. This is more about the process for repairs and some about the facilities themselves, but that'll certainly be covered in the report.
But so this part goes beyond our public safety specific buildings to all of the different maintenance buildings around the city. So for example, the facility, I think in Councilmember Payne's ward, currently housing the water maintenance facility, right? So like public works kinds of facilities that are dispersed. Okay.
Yes, Chair Palmisano, this is the collaboration point between the two divisions. I think both of them maintain buildings outside of the kind of two core city hall, public service center. And that's the primary focus. So the community safety auditors working with the enterprise auditors together will cover the kind of breadth of buildings, public works, police, fire, all those.
And are all of our buildings covered with property and finance services?
Property and finance services is the central source for buildings.
Yep.
Some are, there's this overlap with MBC that's complicated, but
Yeah.
that's for the audit report to discuss.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Abene.
Thank you. This will exclude, though, park board buildings, the rec centers and things like that, right?
Chair Palmisano, committee member Abene, this is the phase 1 project, so I could see the envisioning phase 2 project, including perhaps the
Okay,
park board facilities.
let's keep that dialogue open, and I think that there's a different model Park Board uses for understanding the backlog of deferred maintenance and tracking maintenance and so on. The other question I would have, and this is me not knowing the answer, but isn't there some kind of county, city building set, and maybe you mentioned it, Chair Palmisano, how does that work, and aren't there some buildings under the county that city owns?
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, committee member Abene, that's the Municipal Building Commission. And that overlap, we'll parse it out in the report. It's somewhat complicated, but we don't have exclusive control over every space as the city.
Okay,
So
thank you.
we'll parse that information out, but typically the buildings that we're talking about for this audit are outside of the kind of city hall downtown area. I mean, some may be included, but I think that will be less of an issue in this report.
Okay, thank you.
Not seeing any other questions.
Next, to discuss worker safety, I'm going to call back up our senior auditor, Allison Newman. Thanks, Allison.
Ms. Newman?
Chair Palmisano, committee members. So the city does continue to see some worker safety concerns for staff, especially those that are in the field. Internal audit takes this very seriously and always considers the safety of staff during engagements. To address worker safety concerns more directly, internal audit will be developing a new worker safety risk assessment component that will be included as part of each internal audit engagement moving forward. This focused risk assessment will help identify, assess, and evaluate the effectiveness of internal controls for those specific risks. Any questions on that section?
I want to point out that one of our first audits that we did with this reconstituted audit committee, it was a number of years ago, was with the forestry department. And it was about worker safety in the forestry department. I think we've since remediated all of those issues, but it was a good start. Now we're seeing worker safety, and I can't impress enough what you said, and is on the last slide, that worker safety due to increased burnout because of staffing shortages does seem to generally be one of the biggest risks that we have. And I think we all see it every day.
Definitely. And as far as, the forestry I would have to defer to the city auditor as far as remediation of those, but yes.
Yep.
And then I'm going to hand it over back to city auditor.
Yeah, we complete a number of work papers, a fraud work paper, a race equity work paper for each audit engagement that we do. So I think adding this worker safety one is going to be a really valuable thing to assess in every engagement.
I think it's a great thing to look at as we're also looking at the hiring and as a follow-on to the HR audit. Mr. Fisher has a question or comment.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Ryan, Ms. Newman, worker safety is always an issue. Are we indicating that because of burnout or stress, that some workers are maybe less attentive on the workplace and may involve some accidents or injuries?
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, that could be a component. That's the type of work that we're going to do in assessing. You know, for example, if we're talking about building maintenance, the worker safety assessment component of that might be how is the building set up for fire prevention in the event that there were, mold or something along that line. So it'll take on a different nature depending on the audit that we're doing. You could see, if there's burnout that exists among snowplow drivers, that might increase the risk of accidents and stuff like that. So that's the rather than trying to do one audit to address worker safety across the city, it seemed to make more sense to just build that into each thing we did. Next, talk about purchasing cards. I'm going to ask
If I could
Colin.
pause you just briefly, Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, sorry, back on worker safety. Just out of curiosity for your process, will you be making efforts to reach out to former employees to at least see, if they did separate from the city, what are the aspects that led to that? Was it safety concerns? Was it burnout? Was it, physical threats of violence or psychological safety? I think it'd be interesting to hear from the folks who are no longer with the city why they may have left.
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Payne, I think for the workplace culture risk assessment, that's particularly relevant. So I would put a pin in that specifically for that. And we do generally, when we're doing audit work, try and interview the most diverse array of people who've experienced the issue. So that may include, for example, in the hiring promotions audit, people who applied but didn't necessarily get it. We get feedback from them. So I could see in the workplace culture risk assessment, something like that being of value.
Thank you.
And that, again, we'll have, since we have this worker safety component of every kind of project that we're doing, that would be something that would come up. All right, next, discuss, do we have one more question? Sorry.
My apologies, I didn't see you down there, Ms. Trammell, our city attorney.
No problem. Chair Palmisano, I just wanted to comment on Councilmember Payne's comment that I believe there is a standard process in HR to do exit interviews. So a lot of that information may already be obtained. It just needs to be accessed. So when people leave the city, HR does make an effort to do exit interviews.
Yeah, that's very valuable information. Thank you. All right, moving on to the next item, I'm going to invite Kamlin back up to discuss the purchasing cards, our P-card program.
Chair Palmisano, committee members, the city purchasing car or P-car are the city's work credit car for employee or department for small routine purchase. So what we observe here is like the P-car, I don't have the map there, but it's in the report. There's a trend, it's increasing every month and every year. So recently, it's a convenient for people to go purchase up to 5,000. But when we see that trend increasing, we want to go in. That's a risk area for the city. For the last year, the average monthly spending is $230,000, And this year, the first 2 months, we observed that we spent already 500,000, more than 500,000 for the first 2 years. So we want to go in, and it's a risk area for the city. We want to assess the control. Because you're using PICA, you bypass the CD procurement normal process to expedite the spending, but also when bypassing that, and we want to know what the control around that. We suppose the requirement, if people are respecting the requirement around the spending. And we've proposed one engagement there, the CDPCA program spending. The objective is to determine whether control for administration and monitoring of the purchasing car program in place and functioning as attending to reduce risk of fraud, waste, and abuse. So that's the project we have on that area.
Commissioner Abene.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I like this one a lot because, you know, in my day job, my team has a P card. And some of it was supply chain related, where we had to also have an increase in the use of a P card because of going to suppliers that we weren't set up to work with necessarily. But I can't remember, I saw that there might be some reference to the protocols and the processes in the regular purchasing workflow. And I would guess that this will push on that a little bit to review, because of course, if it's been made too cumbersome, and I know that happens sometimes for the best of reasons, but it's unnecessarily, belts and suspenders, that I hope that that will be evaluated so that, make it as easy as possible so people aren't diverting to this other process. So that's just what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Lady, I noticed in the report that there was a peak for P-card usage in July 2022 that resulted in a bill of $410,000, which is like twice what the average had been. Any idea why that occurred?
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, we don't have any idea of that, where we want to go in, observe that when we do our work, and we want to check what this is happening in this area this time. So we just assess that risk. So we see that that peak is a risk for the city. Now with this project, we can go in and find out what's really happening here.
Thank you.
Mr. Alede, is it reasonable to assume that every different department has the same policy for using their purchasing cards, or are different departments given different parameters?
Chair Palmisano, the CD PICA program is managed through procurement process. So every department goes through that procurement. It's what I know. The procurement department have PICA management office there. They manage the CD PICA program.
Thank you. This will be interesting to learn more about.
Mm-hmm. No question? So turn back there.
I know we're playing musical chairs. I really do want the staff who are primarily involved in the work to be the ones presenting on what they're going to be working on. And so, again, to introduce Allison to discuss NCR and neighborhood organizations.
Chair Palmisano, committee members. One of the ways that the city of Minneapolis supports community engagement is via the One Minneapolis Fund, which is facilitated by the Minneapolis Neighborhood and Community Engagement Commission. And that is funded by the general fund of the city of Minneapolis budget. The city awards funds to neighborhood organizations via a request for proposal RFP process through the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department, known as NCR. Activities described in the proposals must support leadership development and community engagement by members of under-engaged communities. So as part of the NCR department strategies, under a blueprint for equitable engagement, specifically Measure 2.3, it tasks NCR with ensuring awarded organizations meet funding requirements. NCR does fund and arrange audit services for neighborhood organizations to ensure better oversight, protect public assets and neighborhood boards, and provide confidence that public funds are used appropriately. Internal Audit monitored a multi-year implementation strategy for improving internal controls in organizations that received these city awards. And now that initial rollout has taken place, Internal Audit determined that this is an appropriate time to test controls. As such, the Internal Audit Department recommends an assessment of NCR implemented internal controls for neighborhood organizations to be added to the 2023 audit plan.
I'm not seeing any questions, but I will have one, and that's just a little bit about scope and framing. At the end of last year, the city council asked for a legislative directive. What does that mean? It means that we asked our NCR department and our city multi-jurisdictional departments to take a fresh look at how money was being spent through neighborhood organizations and the different types of funds that are easier or harder or having barriers for neighborhood organizations to actually program and get out the door. My sense is this will not go into that scope of unspent fund balances. Is that correct?
I might have to defer to the city auditor on the scoping for this particular proposed audit.
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, I don't think this is as much about how the money is spent and more so about the controls related to how we make sure that the money is spent according to city policies and proper controls are in place so that we're not losing money via fraud, waste, or abuse or things of that nature. So that system of controls that NCR implemented was a very comprehensive overhaul of monitoring of neighborhood organizations from this audit and compliance lens. Now we're here to validate that those controls are functioning as intended. So.
Thank you. My other understanding is that neighborhood organizations are not allowed to apply for the One Minneapolis Fund. That's not a neighborhood organization function. That's what you might be talking about is the Partnership Engagement Fund.
That might be correct. Yeah, my mistake. We'll look into it, and we'll have that tuned up when we're conducting the audit.
Thank you.
Next, we'll talk about the public engagement process. So engagement with the public, this is the cornerstone of government. However, there are lots of risks involved in community engagement when we're talking about large-scale projects, events, things of that nature, strategic and reputational. If we don't conduct strategic risks, we can harm our own reputation when the community doesn't feel like they were adequately queried for large public projects. Public health and safety, we get good feedback from residents about what impacts they're having based on public projects. Operational and financial, when the engagement process doesn't go well and we won't run into significant operational problems during a project, could have pretty big slowdown effects or financial effects on how the city conducts business. And we might miss opportunity. So if there's a good opportunity to do something and we're not engaging the public, then we might miss out on that good feedback. So city officials, policymakers, department staff all express kind of emerging challenges when engaging the community for input on projects and policies. I can recall one conversation in which someone in the departments mentioned that on a period of like online comment, normally we'd get 75 to 100 responses to a public comment, and now we're getting something on the magnitude of 20,000 comments. Because we have increased national attention. There's more of an ease in accessing government officials to weigh in on a project. So going from that and scaling up to this massive amount of comment creates a lot of challenges in assessing what comments are from residents, what voices are we hearing, which just presents a unique challenge in the modern era. I mean, you think about the proliferation of chatbots and things like that could have an impact on our ability to get genuine public comment and public engagement with our residents and community and people who live and work in the city. On top of that, some limited communication budgets, whether it be for policymakers or staff, can make engagement challenging. ward budgets, things of that nature, when you want to reach your constituents. Budgets can place constraints, so making sure that we're maximizing the effective use of our engagement resources is also critical. To that end, we are proposing one engagement, and that is reviewing the public engagement process to ensure that there are controls that mitigate these new emergent risks. We're not necessarily talking in this audit about public engagement in its entirety, but more these new and emerging trends that people expressed, that we have controls in place to help mitigate those.
So if, Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, a little preamble to this comment is I was working on developing the alternative response that led to BCR before I ran for council, and we launched a survey before George Floyd was murdered, and we had about 200 responses, and then we republished that survey maybe a month after the uprising, and then we got 8,000 responses, and I had to personally read every single one of them. But we happened to be in DC for the National League of Cities, and Senator Smith invited us to the chamber, and she was presiding, and it happened to be over the TikTok discussion around whether or not the federal government should ban TikTok. Not trying to bring that into the scope here, but you're mentioning the ability for these chatbots to create a massive amount of responses, of which we saw in 2016 the influence of bots on social media. But I'm curious if you're thinking about, this debate about TikTok specifically right now is really kind of two different debates at the same time. One is like data privacy and security, but the other one is influence. And TikTok's not the only platform that has algorithmic influence. Essentially, like what you read in your news feed is really shaping how you feel about current events. I'm wondering if that kind of like how your view of current events is getting shaped by these mediated social media sites is a component to how you're thinking about this. I just wanted to have, it's kind of a question comment.
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Payne, I think the discussion of social media's influence is relevant. I mean, that is part of what we're talking about. To be clear, we're not placing a judgment on the amount of engagement. The audit department's not saying more engagement is bad. It's more, this is about controls to make sure that we're effectively receiving and using it. And certainly the influence of social media, of which I'm not an expert on, to be clear, is relevant for something like this, so.
Yeah, I don't think there's easy answers to any of that, but just wanted to make sure it's something that we're at least discussing as a body.
I think Councilmember Payne said it better than I could. What is the risk in public engagement? Shouldn't we do more of it all the time? But I think some of what my colleague said speaks to my concern, which would be a body of feedback leading us in a disingenuous way because of bots or other types of influences. Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question about the, reviewing the public engagement process. I'm just looking at the objective here. So does that mean, I hear online, in person, would this be encompassing of all of that?
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Koski, we'll look at the various channels in which we receive kind of public feedback, so that will be varied, yeah.
And then does this also include, as a follow-up question, both our legislative and executive branch, so the council and also all departments in the city, or is this predominantly in just the departments of the city?
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Koski, as the legislature is one of the key points of connection to the community, I would assume definitely that looking at the diverse array in which we communicate with our residents, that the legislators and policymakers would be included in that discussion, certainly.
I like to hear that. Thank you.
Commissioner Abene.
Thank you. I'm excited about this one. I know the park board will be included in this work as well. And the park board does a tremendous amount of community engagement around its plan. But one thing, as now a person that sits as a commissioner that has to sort of weigh options as maybe for planning and things like that primarily, I have a lot of uncertainty sometimes about where the feedback's coming from because of the technology. And I think part of this would be my interest to also maybe have some discussion as you do your work with people that are elected and will be making decisions on adopting plans and things like that. Because from my point of view, I think I have a very clear idea of who I think the stakeholders should be, and that term is another term that I think could be maybe looked at with this work, because it gets used all the time in every way to the point of which it has become, I think, meaningless. And to me, in District 6, in the city of Minneapolis, my stakeholders are the citizens and the residents of Minneapolis, and really not anybody else, the vast, vast majority of the time. So I want to be sure that's who I'm hearing from. So I think if you have the opportunity to talk to elected people, I think that would be a good thing as well, so we can understand who it is, who are the people we're trying to hear from, and who are we trying to reach. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Singleton, and then, Ms. Singleton.
Thanks. This is clearly a really interesting topic. So I'm wondering, and I know this is early, but have you come across any promising practices in other jurisdictions, specifically around online feedback, and whether there are automated ways to weed out or at least flag comments that are likely to have come outside of the, I guess, relevant stakeholders, however we define that?
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Singleton, we in our kind of industry research have come across concerns and other audits that have touched on similar subject material. I haven't gotten to the point of proper controls related to it yet, but certainly we're not unique in experiencing this, and this is something that's being considered across the country and nations all around the world.
Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, and I want to maybe be more explicit about it. So like in the report, you talk about this as strategic and reputational risk, meaning, does the public feel that they were engaged in a way that their input actually made a difference to the outcome? And what I've witnessed in a lot of community engagement processes is either a shaping or limiting of options to the point that communities being engaged almost as a box checking exercise because the outcome has already been determined. So that's on the front end. And I've also experienced on the back end where, because what the community by majority said didn't align with the policy goals at the beginning, there was like a desire to kind of dismiss it. And I saw this firsthand, like I said, in that example of developing an unarmed response for the city. And so I'm wondering, from a controls perspective, if we could do some deep investigation in terms of what expectations are we setting up at the beginning of the process? Are we only providing narrow choices so that whatever commentary exists, the outcome will be the outcome? And then what controls are there at the end of the process to really make that distinction between, and I mean, I understand the risk of a chat bot and like a bad faith set of comments, but I don't think we should be excluding comments just because they're in high volume, right? It's like, I'd be very interested in those controls at the beginning and what processes are happening at the end to make sure that we're both setting the right set of expectations around community engagement at the beginning, and so that we're not being overly dismissive at the end of that process to the point of when people do give a clear preference, it's ignored. That's the thing that I worry about community engagement, where I think we fall down a lot, is we go through the motions of inviting people into a decision-making process and then disregard what they have to say because we've already made our determination before the process started.
Yeah. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Patrick, one of the things that we all know about the city of Minneapolis is that it is a magnet for people all around the region, if not around the country or elsewhere. So when we look for public comment and public input and engagement, we're probably, I assume, talking about not just city residents, but but a far greater audience, the people that use our resources and are welcome to the city, of course, particularly if they spend money here. Are we gonna be looking at the percentages of people engaged that are city residents versus those who may not be city residents, and does that make a difference?
Yep. Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, I think, again, not placing a value judgment per se on the engagements themselves, more so the controls in place to make sure that they're actually achieving the goals of the stated goals of the departments who are working on the projects, programs, the stated goals of the legislators, policymakers, trying to tie what is the objective, the goal of a specific engagement, and were there sufficient controls in place to make sure that we got the information that mitigated some of those risks that we talked about. So certainly there, between the Super Bowl, the events of 2020, all these things increase the attention, national attention on Minneapolis, and we want people to come and enjoy the city, and so comments are valid, not judging where comments come from per se, but is comments from a national audience particularly relevant to the goal of a specific engagement process? If it's a improvement process on sidewalks on a block in a certain part of Minneapolis and we're getting 20,000 comments about it, is that helpful for the people who are planning the project? That might be, this is anecdotal. Again, I'm not speaking of a specific instance, but are we achieving the goal that we set out to do if we're getting that type of feedback? How are we using it?
Commissioner Bene.
Thank you. And just to comment on that a little bit, and also Councilmember Payne's comment, I think there's not going to be one size fits all. So I really like what you've set up here. It's not the public engagement process. But again, I think, and I'm quite sure that the people that are doing this work inside of our organizations, the city and the park board, have deep discussions about stakeholders and things like that. Who are we trying to reach in this project? Who should we be expecting to hear from so they know that they're meeting those goals? But again, to maybe give them some more tools to know that, I think is the point. And then to maybe what Councilmember Payne was saying, I think it really depends on the project. I think that sometimes you said the word policy. I think that's the right word. Policy decisions maybe should be embedded in the project itself and not necessarily up for discussion with the community if they're really fundamental. Similarly, there might be technical decisions that need to be just basic and really aren't part of the public engagement. And sometimes that gets blurred. So I think, some of those things are maybe outside of this just generally with the public engagement process. But again, I think this is the right chunk of work looking at the risks of emerging technologies and really what the city's been seeing and the park board. So just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Next, I'll talk about the procurement process. So we're familiar with the fact that it ensures the city gets the best value for goods, the stated goals of the procurement process. This is specifically recent events raised concerns about the procurement process and associated controls. Internal Audit is conducting a two-phase project. One is the review of the IAM event and expanding the project into a holistic review of the procurement process, particularly as it pertained to this type of event. So again, objective in this we will be using an outside consultant to make sure we have a free and neutral review of the procurement process as it played out during the IAM event, and then that will become kind of foundational evidence as we begin to discuss the more holistic procurement process audit. And that work on phase one is in progress. Expect an update for the audit committee, a completed project in June.
Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm trying to understand also, just when I followed along with how that unfolded, it seemed to be not just the procurement process, but for lack of a better term, the fiscal sponsor relationships that we have. I feel like there was not just the component of money coming out of the city towards vendors, but also money coming into the city via various mechanisms, and I'm wondering if that's in scope as well.
We will be doing a pretty holistic review of the events that transpired, so I think you'll find discussion that clarifies, as there's been a lot of discussion lacking some substantive detail. Hopefully we'll be able to fill in that detail, and that should help us understand, the kind of variety of things that were at play, perhaps avoid some issues in the future, but also specifically procurement process is a big part of what was at play here. Authorization of contracts, things of that nature.
Committee Member Singleton.
Thank you. Similar to Councilmember Payne, just as a community member kind of following along, one of the issues that seemed to be raised was around communications and communications support, which I know has been covered in previous audits, but I was wondering if that would at all be within scope of the current audit here.
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Singleton, I think the event review and kind of the spending and associated, benefits and whatnot that came with that spending, I think may help clarify some of the communications. We're not specifically, though, looking at necessarily the planning and advertising and whatnot for the event. This is more how did the kind of those core spending components play out behind the scenes.
Do you think that one of the recommendations that might come out of this could help us, that when we take on future events, that we, as you have it on this slide, align with city goals, but also further them, right? Like, if our goal in an event is to lift up a group in our city, that we ensure that they are the ones benefiting from the money that we spend on the event. Do you foresee there being recommendations on how to do that better when we take on such a thing, if or when we take on such a thing in the future?
Chair Palmisano, we always think of goals as kind of the foundational piece. Then we look at objectives, and then are there sufficient controls in place that would make those objectives achieve the goals? So I think I can't state necessarily what recommendations will come out of this, but if we're taking goals as kind of the first starting point and looking at outcomes, were there sufficient controls in place to get there? That may be a part of the review.
Thank you.
Next, I'll talk about rental properties inspection. So there is a kind of things playing out in court and in other venues that would potentially create a substantial increase to the number of rental properties that the city of Minneapolis would be inspecting through our inspection services. We're currently staffed to inspect the current service level. This may have a pretty sizable impact on that. A lack of timely inspections increases, I think, the risks abound. It's pretty clear if we're not doing timely inspections, there's public health and safety risks, operational risks, and strategic risks if the city's not able to provide good, affordable, safe rental housing. And this potential increase would be a substantial one for the city. So we're proposing an engagement, a consultation with the inspection services to work with them on a risk assessment as we think about what if this new portfolio of properties comes into their domain, but also in general, a risk assessment, what controls are in place to make sure they're achieving their objectives, and looking at the process itself for efficiency, quality of services, and the economy of what we're doing. If we are going to take on a new portfolio of work, knowing the staff that we have, it's important that they go in strategically, and we think we can help with that.
Committee Member Singleton.
Thank you. More of a comment than a question, but just to note that putting on my legal aid hat, like getting an inspection and having that evidence can be a really important first step toward being able to file a rent escrow action if legal action needs to be taken to get rental repairs remediated. So just wanted to include that as something that can have pretty dramatic impacts if that's not available in a timely manner.
Chair Palmisano, committee member Singleton, we did have in the kind of parking lot of the audit plan, affordable housing as an audit item. That is such a broad thing for the audit department to review. We're going to break it into chunks, and this is kind of one of the first bites at the apple for looking at affordable housing across the city. We have one more section, so these are just kind of things we noted during the risk assessment that we wanted to raise and flag. They may merit future audit projects, but don't have one associated with them currently. One is the 311 issue, reporting and remediation process. There is a new system in place to track 311 and perhaps council member phone calls and emails and stuff that would track how those repairs or whatever it is the service the resident's looking for, how it's completed, handled, and the associated data attached to it. So that's very much in the works and being developed. As such, it's not necessarily the right time for audit to be involved in it, but it's something worth noting as 311 is one of the primary, if not the primary, like first points of contact for a lot of residents reporting an issue that they're experiencing. The second is drug and alcohol testing for commercial driver's licenses. There are federal and state requirements that relate to drug and alcohol testing. There's a standard process that plays out where a certain proportion of people are required to be tested. There has been, there were some concerns raised about the process for notifying candidates and some specific things related to it. It didn't make the risk assessment cut right now, given the full audit workload that we have, but depending on how things kind of play out behind the scenes, it's possible that could come onto the audit plan for future review. Kind of the last piece, the subrogation process. I'll have our expert Nikita Lane discuss the subrogation process.
Hello again. So another issue that presented itself during the annual risk assessment was the subrogation process and how it's not streamlined and may require process review. Oftentimes, city property sustains damages. Damages may stem from motor vehicle accidents or other damage to property incidents. The city is self-insured and is responsible for making itself whole. When city property is damaged, reporting parties may misidentify city property as private property or state-owned property. Misidentification causes a delay in the city's ability to obtain critical incident information necessary to help begin the subrogation process. Delays in the subrogation process may jeopardize the city's ability to collect from the at-fault party and may result in the city absorbing the cost of repairs. Streamlining the subrogation process will ensure the city is well positioned to effectively respond to these incidents and hold at-fault parties or their insurers responsible for damages to city property.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee members. I know that was a long presentation in detail. I am putting forth the proposed audit plan. We know that it's quite ambitious and likely we won't complete every audit that's on the plan. But we want to make note of everything, give ourselves the opportunity to start a project without coming back to the audit committee when time and schedules align with the departments that we're working with. So knowing this is a rolling audit plan, things can be added and removed as time goes on. The plan you see in front of you is the one we put forth for adoption.
Thank you for this presentation. Do any of my colleagues have questions on the risk assessment as a whole? Commissioner Abene.
Well, it's one more annoying little question. So at the end, the other items, they're not going in the plan now, but they're sort of on deck maybe for a future plan? Okay. Because, I mean, this is probably totally obvious, but the 311, I think, is a good one to do, not just for the responsiveness to the citizenry, which, you know, I am one of those people, but more importantly, I think it's a way for managers of different parts of the city to inform their own risk if they're hearing from a certain type of, inquiry over and over again. The city it's another tool to understand risk, so.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I was challenged last week by a constituent to say, in order to really be able to say what is important here at the city, we have to be able to say what's not important. And that's a very difficult exercise. It's really hard to figure out what we are specifically going to focus on around here, and what we're going to work on holding people accountable to. So I know this is a challenging exercise, and I know that the ability to say no around here is actually a little bit too rare, right? It leads people to not liking it or not liking you. But these are our expectations, is to come up with a proposed audit plan. So thank you for this effort. Seeing no further questions or comments from my colleagues, I'll direct the clerk to receive and file this report. And we can move on to the 2023 Risk-Based Enterprise Audit Plan, which is
This is the
this.
proposed plan you'd see in front of you.
The plan, yes, the risk assessment, no.
Would you like me to run through all the items? They reflect what we've talked about. And then
They reflect what we've spoken about. Can you give us a sense, is this in an order in terms of quarters, or this is just a?
Chair
laundry list?
Palmisano, we decided that rather than putting them in order of either importance or dates, the best thing for us to do is constantly be communicating with the departments across the city who do that work. Kind of there are peaks and troughs in their work a lot of the time, and it's giving us that flexibility, that recognizing this is a great time for this department. They can kind of lend us more of their time during this period, and then we can start that engagement. So we call it a rolling audit plan in the sense that we will be tackling these projects both based on the risks themselves, we put them on the plan, but also when we have to work with our colleagues, making sure that the time is right.
Thank you. So for my colleagues, before you is a 15-page risk-based audit plan that refers to these slides, and we're currently moved on to new business item 4, which is approving the 2023 risk-based enterprise audit plan. So questions or comments from my colleagues? Mr. Fisher? No? Okay. And that is what we've been going through here in the presentation, was the method that, well, a little deeper dive into the different pieces, but the document before you speaks a little bit to kind of what their process looks like, and you'll see some exhibits in there about what the risk management process is that they undergo to do this across the city enterprise. So I will move approval of the 2023 risk-based enterprise audit plan. Could I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries, and this item is approved. Thank you. Next, we'll go on to new business item number 5, which is the 2023 risk-based community safety audit plan.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. In the 2023 budget, we received funding for 2 community safety auditors. This group specifically looks at the community safety branch and focuses their energy in that area. To that end, this year we asked them to conduct a community safety focused risk assessment to build out their audit plan, and then the other enterprise auditors would look at the rest of the remaining organization. This presentation represents a culmination of dozens and dozens of interviews, detailed subject matter review, again, industry best practices, looking at trends and whatnot around the nation. The 2 community safety audit staff will be presenting are going to cover the report. We wanted to make sure that since this is the first time we've done this type of work, that we covered in detail and proposed a plan that's both comprehensive and well-researched. With that, I will call up Travis Kamm. He is our former senior auditor, now community safety auditor, who will kick off the presentation. Along with him is Ryan Franson, and our other community safety auditor who has significant experience in both police and community safety oversight. So they'll both be discussing this report.
Welcome, Mr. Kamm. I bet my colleagues were wondering why we didn't see you in the rotation before, and this is why.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Palmisano, members of the committee. Nice to see you again. So yeah, kind of as Director Packer was talking about, talking more about risk. I know it's talked a lot about risk already, but hopefully kind of another little more focus and a little bit kind of different way as we kind of go throughout this community safety risk assessment. And I think kind of to the message, kind of this one is kind of the foundation, as we noted they're kind of building out this division and function. We really wanted to kind of get a really strong kind of foundation as we kind of go forward and kind of build out this and really kind of go from there. So some topics, I'll be kind of talking about background, approach methodology, kind of talking a little bit more about what we did, kind of skipping past some stuff that was already covered. Ryan Francis is going to talk about the risk themes, and then we'll kind of cover at the end kind of the community safety audit plan, so talking about more about the projects that we are proposing for approval as we go throughout. So kind of some background. So again, we do these risk assessments. We got these 2 community safety auditor positions that a couple of months in now, and kind of from the budget process, there's it really kind of defined kind of what the public safety auditor, what these community safety auditors kind of would focus on, really kind of focus again on kind of the audit topics, controls, efficiencies, risk, accountability within the public safety realm. So the budget kind of process kind of talked about 911, emergency management, fire, neighborhood safety, police. We also kind of cover park police, and kind of also in a broader sense, there's different programs and areas across the city that cover community safety operations as well that would be kind of roped in over time, but kind of focusing right now kind of within those aligned kind of departments in those regions. And really too, with this plan, it's kind of an opportunity to dig deeper kind of over time and kind of really narrow down in, some of these in high inherent risk nature items, as everyone kind of knows community safety, public safety is always kind of at the forefront, and it just carries a high inherent risk in its operation. So we're really kind of able to do a targeted assessment and kind of build relationships and establish communication. So that's kind of another internal goal of ours too, is kind of making sure that we are staying aware of things, on top of things, and really kind of communicating with others across the organization, and kind of making sure that trying to foster communication as well. We kind of do later on talk about communication as a theme as well, since it is, kind of important across the board. And so this assessment report is kind of trying to laying that foundation for the future work. So approach methodology, again, we go by the standards for the Red Book standards. So kind of, we look at systematic, disciplined approach to risk across the enterprise. So to develop the plan, we did kind of, similar message with the enterprise. We talked with stakeholders, did research, had a lot of conversations, kind of looked back at previous audit work, looked at previous things going on, really just kind of what's in the news, and really we had a lot of fruitful and really great conversations with management and staff across the organization, just kind of, talking a little bit more openly and candidly about, what is going on, kind of different topics. And I think, we're rated pretty warmly and kind of, people are wanting to engage with us and kind of wanting to, as we kind of go throughout. Kind of with that too, I think kind of one thing within this, this report and kind of within this year is kind of the uncertainty and just kind of where things are going to kind of fall right now with the MDHR report and the coming up DOJ. We kind of do talk about that in the report, as you kind of see in uncertainty and kind of some of the other risk themes, but really to, we tried our best in terms of these plan creation, kind of other work, to make sure that, we are not going to be duplicating work or kind of interfering in different ways. I think especially since there is kind of that independent monitor, kind of that independent function that will be kind of built out and kind of some of that stuff. We're going to be spending some time probably, throughout probably 3 to 6 months, as trying to figure out too, where our role is kind of better and where we can, best be of use and kind of be that way. So you will kind of see too in the audit plan, we do kind of have a general hold, knowing that things may change, things may come up, and really just trying to be flexible that way. So I think just kind of, it's kind of the elephant in the room, I think, in terms of some of that stuff, because it's hard to kind of narrow down or kind of know until kind of those structures materialize, what is specific, what will audit work, what can audit focus on, what will, some of these other structures that are being built up focus on. So,
Mr. Com,
Yep.
a question or comment from Mr. Fisher?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Com, in the report, I noticed that part of the methodology for the risk assessments we're doing, is to review prior risk assessments, reviewing audit plans, research current industry trends, and meeting with management. All those are well and good. I'm just wondering, is that a narrower scope than you really intend? I'm wondering about the review of general operating documents, complaints, investigations, reports in general that might weigh on your assessment process.
Yep, Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, kind of good question there, and I think, as this initial assessment, we kind of focused on kind of, I think, what was available and kind of what is, what we have. And I think, some of that data, some of that stuff that you might be talking about, I think, we hope to, in some of these, you kind of see some of these projects and kind of throughout the year to kind of get more specific. I think, this assessment, we did it in a couple of months period, and I think, the goal kind of as a community safety, as we talk about communication, is to, have some of these frequent kind of touch points, making sure that, we are getting some of those things on a more routine basis instead of just kind of checking in, once a year, kind of checking in every other year, like, hey, what's, how are things going that way? So I don't think it's not too much reflected, I think, in, this assessment and kind of that one, but I think in terms of some of those more specific complaints, some of the more specific topics, I think, in future reports, future kind of things, we'll kind of be able to get more specific and delve deeper into that one, so.
So a follow-up, if I may, Chair Palmisano. So the list in the reports on page 5 of the report indicating your methodology is not intended, or I shouldn't believe it to be intended, a limiting factor in what you're going to do, but just a general review of the things you're going to accomplish.
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, that's correct, yeah, just kind of, yep, it's not a general kind of sense of, yeah, what we kind of do, but yeah, it's not, definitely not limited by what is it, just kind of identified in those, or I'm kind of bound by those items.
I took reviewing prior risk assessments is not to drill down necessarily infinitely further, but maybe to see what haven't we been doing. Like we've done this, we've spent some time here. What else is there? Is that reasonable to assume?
Chair Palmisano, correct. Yeah, I think, just kind of as you see in the enterprise, it's focused kind of more in a broader sense. And I think, in risk assessments, yeah, it's focusing more, as get more in the community safety, kind of the specific departments or specific operating areas, over time, and kind of, we do kind of talk a little bit more later on about neighborhood safety and kind of doing an exercise with them about doing a departmental risk assessment that would be useful for future audit work as well, and kind of for management that way.
Thank you. Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recognize that we're kind of in an emerging phase of this new capability within audit, but going back to Member Fisher's question around scope, I'm wondering if you could speak to the role of community safety audit is relative to, we just had our MDHR settlement agreement, which has some explicit functions around independent evaluations, and we anticipated Department of Justice consent decree, which will also have an independent monitor. And so there's going to be kind of these different but overlapping roles when it comes to our public safety accountability system. And I'm wondering if we've thought about how those different independent bodies or functions might interact with each other, and how that either narrows or expands your scope.
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Payne, good question. And I think just the general sense is a lot of it's uncertain, and I think kind of hopefully, in the coming audit committees and coming reports, we kind of get more certainty in kind of how we can best interact with them and kind of where we can go. I think there is, now that, the MDHR report, it kind of mentions that independent monitor kind of that way, and there is City Attorney's Office kind of building out a function to respond, and then so is the Police Department, kind of that consent bureau, and we haven't, once that kind of gets up and running, kind of operational, and then it'd be kind of a good time, we kind of do want to engage again and kind of see, what is those topics and some of those areas. I think, it is important to note that, we report to the audit committee, we were risk-based, all the audit plans, all the products that we do, evolved from this report, or from this body where, the consent monitor, some of that stuff is kind of that similar work, but kind of, reporting to that court, some of that structure within the city. So we kind of had a lot of conversations, a lot of discussion, with people involved in management. I think just the general general sense is just, yeah, there's, they have some general plans, some general awareness of how things will operate, but, as you kind of talk about uncertainty, like really no one has a definitive picture. So we'll still kind of feel that out, and I think, we'll be kind of reporting back and kind of, with those projects, we kind of will see, we avoided kind of the topics that were generally covered within the MDHR report or some of the, and kind of what we might think might be from the Department of Justice report, just because we don't want to be coming out with an audit report and then there's, that reporting structure, that some of that, conflicting or kind of duplication of work. But I think, there might be opportunities in, looking at training structures or looking at, things along those lines, as the MDHR report talks a lot about, accountability and kind of that management function of assessing or kind of, making sure where things operate, that things are being checked that way. And I think there's opportunities, through a consultation or through, audits down the road to, see that they're occurring or, provide input that way specifically. So.
Thank you.
So again, kind of the risk universe, as we talked about earlier, just kind of that community safety structure, park police, and then just kind of, community safety programs and operations as we kind of would see, and has been talked about, there's opportunities for collaboration kind of working kind of across the organization, but, community safety at least is kind of defined within those kind of main departments and then other operations. So, how we view risk, there's kind of that probability and likelihood, inherent residual risk, or, there is, just in community safety operations, there is kind of that high inherent risk, of the critical incidents, or for example, or other events. So when we kind of look at this assessment and look at these things, we kind of looked at topics that kind of beyond this inherent risk, like what are some of the underlying themes, or what are the underlying, things that might be adjustable, that can be addressed or kind of, materialize that way. And it just kind of a note too, that risk is unavoidable. Just because there is risk or something is going, doesn't mean, it's not a measure of a performance of a function. It's kind of that how that risk is addressed in some of that management activities, and that's where kind of audit comes in, how management is addressing or monitoring that risk. So kind of, I think this, we kind of talked about this already, but, things that we considered is kind of, those previous work, future work, some of that stuff. And just kind of a note too, as you kind of talked about in the report, but, there is that, audit is kind of that third line of defense is kind of considered where, a dependent and objective assurance of how management is responding and managing risk. So, at the end of the day, management is responsible for managing the risk and kind of, those basic functions. And I think too, just kind of going back to maybe to the MDHR report and the DOJ, it focused a lot about on, management functions, management responsibilities, and that's where, audit can come in at the end and kind of see, is management adequately, responding to those risks that have been identified. So, so now kind of a key findings, community safety.
If I could just pause you briefly, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Com, in the report, you cited the IIA standard 2010A2. It says that you must identify and consider the expectations of senior management and other stakeholders in your for internal audit opinions. It struck me a little bit unusual the way that was worded. I know you didn't write that, it's a standard, but it indicates some kind of lack of independence in the audit function if you have to pay attention to the expectations of people. How do you work through that standard?
Yep. Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, I think, there is kind of a lot of there is kind of language elsewhere kind of building up that independence and assurance. And I think this one is kind of talking a lot about kind of that communication aspect and making sure that, there is that expectation that, audit is communicating across the organization, is getting feedback, is kind of listening to the organization. At the end of the day, everything that audit does kind of goes up through an independent body, which, for final approval. So, for example, these audit plan, these projects and some of that stuff, goes through an audit committee, goes through those things where that kind of independence lies. So it doesn't, mean we have to, we're bound by, what is kind of, management wants this, we have to do it. It's kind of that, take that into consideration, assess it overall. It's kind of our overall work and then kind of, bring it up to the audit committee and, get that independent approval to kind of make sure that we are doing that communication aspect. Perfect. All right. So now kind of getting to key findings. So just kind of an overview, again, these, we have 9 overall risk themes with kind of more specific aspects that support them, as we'll kind of get into. But, just kind of some note things that, these are the broad themes that are identified. We did kind of in the report kind of talk about, try to talk a little bit more about how things have changed or what things have been occurring to kind of reflect that we're changing this risk landscape of the city. And of course, these aren't the only risks. These aren't the, there's plenty of risks out there, but these are kind of the ones that we, as audit kind of identified in the risk assessment as kind of the ones top of mind for management or kind of top of mind for, us as auditors in that way. And then 2, a lot of these themes are interconnected, so they kind of play off each other, kind of play into each other, they cause each other, we kind of did kind of try to, kind of paint that picture too, that, there is nothing as ever kind of in a vacuum or in a, its kind of own way. If we talk about one risk, for example, staff and resourcing, it kind of, can create cascading effects of other impacts, if it's not properly addressed across the organization. So next I'll call up Ryan Franson to talk more about those risk themes.
Well, good morning, Chair Palmisano, committee members. My name is Ryan Franson. I'm the other half of the Community Safety Branch in the City Auditor's Office. I'm going to walk through our key items, starting out with staffing and resources. Departments are facing ongoing staffing and resourcing challenges that impact operations and services, which may lead to employee burnout and further staffing shortages. This is a risk that was identified in the previous 2023 risk assessment. It was also identified in last year's risk assessment and is again a top risk this year as well, because we see that the workforce challenges that the city has been facing remain. There have been some changes. There were some departments that indicated that things were sort of evening out or improving, but many of those issues persist. And departments are also seeing the impacts of continued shortages, particularly in employee burnout, employee separation, work being done inefficiently or incompletely, and other issues. Next, we move on to uncertainty. Uncertainty focuses on community safety operations which are experiencing uncertainty resulting from ongoing investigations and litigation. Various sources of uncertainty have had impacts since 2020, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the murder of George Floyd and the uprising of 2020, government structure changes, the Minnesota Department of Human Rights investigation and court enforceable agreement, Department of Justice investigation and potential consent decree, and staff turnover and a new police administration. Some of the risks that are associated with uncertainty are that obviously it's hard to plan for. You don't know what's coming. It's difficult to plan around that and mitigate some of the things that can come along with that. It requires adjustments to work, to staffing, to planning, to every aspect of the work, and can lead to stress and unsatisfactory work environments, operational failures, as well as it can be exacerbated by communication breakdowns, which we'll talk about a bit later.
Mr. Franson, on these slides you mentioned MDHR and DOJ, and these certainly apply to police, but what you mean is staffing and resources and uncertainty in all of these departments, correct?
Yes, absolutely. All right. Moving on, changes to operations. So new organizational structures and new and expanded programs introduced over the last year have resulted in changes to operations. Some of these risks are related to uncertainty. They're related to, as previously mentioned, they're related to government restructuring. There are new programs and activities that create new opportunities for risk, as well as new work and new benefits to the city and its citizens, as well as court agreements previously mentioned. The MDHR agreement, for example, will introduce significant changes over the coming years. The anticipated consent decree from the Department of Justice will do similarly. As a result, risks arise related to operations and compliance. Outdated policies may become outdated as the work changes, and there also may not be policies and procedures in place to cover some of that new work. There's a need to create and formalize new processes, and during this time, there may be unclear guidance and expectations for staff and the public. Additionally, controls may be insufficient or non-existent to fully cover all of the changes to the operations.
Mr. Franson, I'm going to pause you to call on Mr. Fisher.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I hate to keep asking questions. How is the segment on uncertainty different from the operational changes that you just described? They seem like they're addressing the same issue.
They're very, Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, they're very interconnected. They are very similar in nature. We wanted to call out uncertainty specifically, as we know, and we'll talk about it a bit when we get into the audit plan. We do have a hold for changes relating specifically to the MDHR agreement, as well as the potential Department of Justice consent decree. So we wanted to call out that uncertainty specifically, although you are very correct, they are very similar and there's a lot of overlap between those two. Next, we're moving into cybersecurity systems and data. Departments are still facing heightened risks related to cybersecurity and other IT processes that require adequate attention and resources, including outdated systems. Cybersecurity was also identified in last year's assessment as well as this year's assessment. As discussed by City Auditor Patrick, it continues to be a risk for the city. Specifically to community safety, operations involve critical and very sensitive systems, including 911, police data, other emergency response, which may be outdated and or not easily compatible and functional with today's needs. Specifically relating to data, there is an increased focus on and demand for data. That data with current systems can be very difficult to obtain. It may not be being tracked thoroughly or properly. And additionally, it can be very difficult to export or get into a format that is digestible by city employees or the public.
I just want to point out that, as we work to better coordinate these functions, and for example, the Office of Community Safety, we're building some of these violence prevention techniques and these groups of people that we contract with for them. And I wonder will this also be inclusive of how that department communicates around all the different elements of the public safety organization? Like, some of these are new. Absolutely, some of these are outdated, and it goes way beyond police. But in addition to that, will the ways that we're trying to build more connective tissue here be seen by your look on this work plan?
Chair Palmisano, yes, I believe so. It's one of the things that we set out to do very early on was to kind of establish or reestablish communication between our office as well as the various public safety departments, or community safety departments, excuse me. And one goal of ours is to help the city tends to be a little bit siloed sometimes, and we kind of want to get that connectivity through. And I think looking at new technology is an excellent way to help establish that both passively and actively.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have key person risk. This is related to staffing. Departments are frequently confronting key person risk, wherein an employee with institutional knowledge and key tasks and responsibilities that others cannot easily take over separates from the city. This was something that came up quite a bit in the discussions we had with various departments. There are key staff who are involved in keeping things running. They may be the only person keeping things running in some cases, and if they leave, in addition to work being interrupted, being very difficult to replace, institutional knowledge can be permanently lost. The lack of policies, procedures, and documentation that we sometimes see throughout the enterprise can increase this risk, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. In fact, we're going to talk about it right Policies, procedures, and documentation. Outdated or non-existent policy and procedures may create risks to operations and compliance with best practices and statutory authorities. This was discussed in last year's audit report, and it continues to be a key theme in audit reports and issues. The MDHR report also focused on policies and procedures. When we have a lack of policies, procedures, and documentation, or inadequate or outdated, we see risks of non-compliance, which can bring legal and reputational risk to the city. There are variances, inconsistencies, and deviations in the work that is done. Improper practices can be put into place. There's a lack of sufficient controls and oversight, potential for reputational and operational risks, increased impacts of staff turnover and key person risk identified earlier, as well as increased onboarding times for new employees. So as we're talking about staffing, as we're talking about getting back to being whole, and we're talking about getting work to be more efficient, one thing we have to think about is that when we hire a person, there could still be weeks, months, or years of training to get them up to speed. All right, communication. A lack of failure of communication, both internally and externally, leads to information being siloed, frustration among stakeholders, and a perceived lack of transparency. In the last year, the City Auditor's Office has focused on communication, and it has been a key aspect of previous audit reports. Poor communication or failure to communicate can amplify and factor into other risks, and it can be external and external risks that come into play. Some of the other risks are that people and information are kept siloed. That can lead to a lack of efficiencies in collaboration, which can lead to conflicting work or redundant work. It can also lead to frustration among public and staff if it feels as though the city isn't being transparent, or perhaps that things are not being communicated wholly or effectively, and it can lead to reputational risk as well. Right. Financial management. With a variety of existing and new funding sources and new programs and activities, the management of grants increases risks in compliance with finance and procurement activities. So with new work, with new opportunities, with new departments, there are new grants and additional and increased funding sources coming into the city. And changes to operations, including new programs, activities, and departments, can bring, again, both new sources as well as new eyes and responsibilities to city staff relating to those new financial opportunities. And there's an increased need to ensure compliance and proper management. All right, number 9, last one. Asset management. Supply chain and resource constraints, in addition to changing work habits, have heightened the risk of inefficient asset management, including shortages of key items and increases to the risk of fraud or misuse of assets. As mentioned before in the overall enterprise risk report, supply chains and changing working conditions have shown the importance of proper asset management, and there are increased times and costs to get key equipment and supplies, including squad cars, fire trucks, and other vital vehicles to the city. There's a need to ensure tracking and management of city assets, and when we're speaking of asset management, we're also looking at buildings and facilities. So again, as previously mentioned in the enterprise-wide report, fire stations, police training facilities, police precincts do fall into the asset management category as well. That's something that we're taking a look at.
There's a couple of questions here. We'll start with Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the areas that I'm constantly a little bit confused by in the financial management area is our use of grant funding in our public safety ecosystem. And I know, for instance, our homeless response team is grant funded on the one hand, and on the other hand, some of the other issues you highlighted around our staffing shortages have left surpluses in departments like the police department. And then I know that we're also continuously applying for federal grants, and I'm trying to wrap my head around where the shortcoming is for our financial management and programming, and then where the surpluses are and how we balance those out. And specifically, I'm trying to understand what's the opportunity cost for pursuing some of these grants, because there is quite a bit of administrative burden in seeking out some of those grant funding too. So will this assessment get into kind of those imbalances or opportunity costs associated with how we're funding public safety?
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Payne, I think that's a fantastic question. I think that it is very important to take a look into that, particularly the sort of shortage and surplus, and balancing that out, I think is vital to the city and very important. In the course of our preliminary discussions to kind of establish the basis of this report, we didn't get that deep into some of those details, though I anticipate that we will in the future. We primarily, what we received back from those departments was that there was a lot of confusion about how those processes work, who should be in charge of those. It felt like there were times where sometimes there was probably supposed to be some interdepartmental communication about that, that maybe either wasn't happening or was unclear, partially due to key person risk, and other people leaving the city and other things like that. So I don't have a ton of specifics for you on that right now, but it is something that I think is very important to look at and that we'll be diving deeper into.
Thank you.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Mr. Franson, I certainly recognize in this section of asset management the lack of resources, the costs, rising costs. These are all creating complications. But you have also indicated that are identified that inadequate management and oversight may lead to fraud, waste, and abuse. I'm just wondering, what are you referring to there? That city employees might be using the limited equipment that we already have for their own personal use, or what is that?
I think it's a broad acknowledgement of the importance of oversight to ensure that city resources are being used properly, that policies are being followed appropriately, that the work is being done correctly. There wasn't, anything I think specific we were pointing at, as much as an acknowledgement that oversight is necessary to make sure that city resources are used appropriately.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, moving on. So what are we going to do about it? This is the proposed 2023-2024 audit plan. This audit proposes the following consultations and audits be added to the 2023-2024 work plan. This plan is a flexible roadmap. It may and most likely will change, again, particularly in light of the MDHR agreement, the potential consent decree, and other things in the ever-changing city environment. And as project planning occurs, objectives will be more focused and the scope will be better defined. To go into this in greater detail, I'm going to bring back Travis Cohn.
Chair Palmisano, members of the committee. So again, kind of, these, we intend kind of an ambitious plan for kind of a small staff, but we kind of intend, throughout the rest of this year and kind of next year, to kind of be able to, touch upon a lot of different topics. Some of these projects are intended to be a little bit smaller in scope or nature. Others might be a little bit more lengthier, and really try to address, some of those risk themes kind of throughout. And then again, too, we do anticipate, throughout the coming year, coming months, coming years, coming back to the audit committee with, new topics or kind of more defined areas that way. So these are kind of the ones that, we have been talking with, kind of identified that we think we can provide the most value in, kind of that is a consideration of too of, where we can provide our input, we can contribute to value, and kind of knowing that there is, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of these structures going up elsewhere across the city that, will kind of play into it. So kind of two, kind of we have an ongoing project right now, a consultation with MECC that we've kind of talked about. There'll be future updates at the audit committee, but that is looking at, the contracts and relationships with the city, MECC has with other intergovernmental relationships. So that was approved as part of last year's audit plan, kind of in progress right now throughout this work. And then these are kind of the ones that we're proposing. So again, we do have this acknowledgement about the ongoing court enforceable agreement consent decree. I think, right now, as we talked about earlier, it's a little kind of murky or kind of unsure, but I think a key aspect of those, at least the court enforceable agreement, is kind of building up a lot of those auditable functions, with that audit can one day come in, with once they're operating, once they're established, and look at, see, making sure, even with the independent monitors gone or, they're here, but looking at different things, we can go and, verify that, yes, the structure that, related training, for example, is still operating as it was intended. So kind of put a pin in this for now, but, just acknowledgement that we do anticipate probably, especially in future years, beyond maybe not 2023, but, 2024, as they have established, have their operating, that we can kind of provide those values. So there's that acknowledgement. These next couple ones, again, we kind of talked a lot with management, kind of talked a lot about what kind of is going on. For this one, we do kind of, if it is approved, we do kind of have management wanting us to come in, and willing to work with us kind of starting in the next couple of weeks, starting this property and evidence audit. So we last did one, I believe, in 2017, and a lot has changed as they've consolidated from, they're in 3 or 4 locations, and now they're in 1 warehouse in North Minneapolis, and it is a high risk, high value, or high risk, kind of high profile function of the city. Going back in to review the processes and controls kind of in a similar fashion as Audit did 6 years ago, but, with a mindset that, a lot has changed since then and some of that stuff. So this one, we do anticipate this one kind of be one that we will start kind of sooner in the next couple of weeks if it is kind of approved, as management is really open and willing to engage with us in this one. Next two are kind of related to neighborhood safety. So that is kind of that new department kind of formed out of the Office of Violence Prevention this last year's budget cycle. And as we talked about in the risk, the new programs, new activities, changes to operations, this kind of department, as it is kind of getting established, is kind of transitioning from being a part of the health department to its own kind of independent standing body. We kind of, identified 2 activities for this one. So this first one, kind of more of a risk assessment, so kind of more of an activity with us working with management to look at, to kind of assess, to have management assess themselves, kind of their operations, especially now that they're independent, kind of having to build out a lot of these structures, for example, procurement processes, or kind of some of these own processes that they relied on for the health department for, now they're on their own. They do a lot of grants, contracts, a lot of that stuff, and really trying to help them kind of, identify, in a broader sense, policies, procedures, roles and responsibilities, oversight monitoring, do you have these in place, or can you work on those? Kind of similar to an exercise that we did with the park board, kind of launched a couple years ago, with them kind of, a bigger sense of kind of this risk management team across the whole organization, kind of, going in and kind of evaluating on a recurring basis and self-identifying, a lot of these common things that audit would expect in the future. So this one too, we do kind of anticipate to be a short engagement, and kind of do, if it is approved, kind of looking to begin this sooner, have a lot of willingness and kind of openness to kind of do this, not an audit, but kind of this special project consultation risk assessment one. Next one, again, kind of neighborhood safety, kind of intending to kind of feed off upon the first kind of one, looking more specifically at the grants and contracts of this neighborhood safety. They do have a lot of grants, contracts, a lot of kind of operations kind of related that way, and kind of doing a consultation. So looking at kind of, as we have done a lot of grant audits in the past, we did a contract amendments audit a couple years ago, we're really kind of doing a targeted consultation with them and making sure that they do have controls in place and they're operating efficiently with contracts and grants. And then these next couple, so this, fleet management audit, as it's kind of covered within the enterprise one, but just, calling out, looking at specifically this one, kind of a Minneapolis Police Department fleet management audit. So looking at the management and the efficiency, management, the controllers and the management of the squad cars, essentially. I think this has kind of been a topic that's come up every now and then, and kind of, looking at this one, I think, in the community safety lens, especially with the squad cars that way, as I think we identified in the 2019 off-duty audit report, for example, some controls related to the squad car uses, and really trying to close the loop and cut some of those gaps that way. So impound lot audit, so looking at the process and controls around the impound lot. So audit lasted a impound lot review, I believe in 2011 or significant period time back. So kind of revisiting that one and looking at the controls and controls and processes around the impound lot. MP special units and programs audit, so kind of as you're kind of seeing some of these, kind of the scoping will kind of come as we kind of begin the product and planning, and so it's kind of things, the objectives, but looking at, these ones, looking at specifically the special units and programs that they, have in some of these relationships with, for example, these task forces, or if they have with, Hennepin County, or, the state, and looking at, how they are run, how they're operating, making sure that there is sufficient, proper oversight and management of these programs. So, and again, you just kind of see, a lot of these we're kind of keeping them more broad and vague, but we do anticipate as we kind of come back and begin the planning to kind of explain more details about, what, special program or unit kind of entails in this one. And similarly, with these ancillary police programs audits, looking at, this one, we're looking at, some of these ones that are connected to the police department, such as the police reserves, young explorers, some of these programs that, have connections with the police department, have, public-facing operations, and really trying to, looking at how they are run and those controls in place. This next one is kind of a, something, a benefit that we're able to do, with a community safety focused team is kind of, doing some of these follow-up audits and projects as we kind of looking at, the impound, or looking at the impound lot, the property and evidence. Sixth one is kind of related to sexual assault examination kit, so a more recent project, a recent kind of one that we did back a little over 3 years ago now, but looking at, making sure that the processes kind of that were identified, some of those risks that were identified are operating, still kind of remediated and kind of operating as intended. There has been some changes just related to state law and kind of the handling of kits and some of the expectations that we can, also measure against. But, knowing that it has been some time, staff management has changed. I'm kind of, going back in as an audit team and kind of doing kind of a targeted, making sure that this program is kind of, operating as kind of as hoped and as intended that way. So looking at the next one is kind of the MPD background check process audit. So this one was kind of carved out of the hiring promotion process audit, but the MPD does kind of have their own kind of background check process and kind of their own unit or area of the department that is kind of quite more lengthy and more intensive than kind of the HR standard one. So we didn't look at that one in the HR audit, but we kind of, made a note of it, and we'd like to kind of circle back into this kind of, just kind of do a targeted assessment of this MPD background check process. And then next, kind of a little activity, kind of a special project or consultation, looking at some data analysis related to officer injured on duty, to review data pertaining to officers injured on duty and analyze for trends. Again, kind of more of a vague objective, but I think, this one is, we talk a lot about officer, employee, and, officer health and safety, health and wellness, seeing, whether we can find patterns or trends in, ways that officers are getting injured on duty, if it's from, for example, if chases, or if it's from, falls, if it's from some of that stuff, and then kind of, give that kind of, anticipate, potential follow-up and kind of things kind of building off that one. But kind of this was kind of the intention of kind of, a more targeted kind of review of this kind of a topic that is, relevant as we kind of have discussed.
Mr. Com, we have a couple of questions in queue. We'll start with Committee Member Singleton.
Thank you. I was wondering, in regard to the sexual assault examination kit project,
Yep.
I'm wondering if that audit will in any way interact with the property and evidence audit that might start in a couple of weeks.
Committee Member, or Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Singleton, good question and kind of a good point. I think something that I've been thinking about and considering, and I think it's still kind of unclear, is there is kind of that MPD, there is kind of that process related to, the handling of the kits within the property and evidence. I think kind of as we get kind of scoping and kind of some of that stuff down, we'll kind of determine, and without planning, maybe we can do this one simultaneously or kind of, within close proximity. I think kind of we have to kind of see in terms of, our resources, kind of planning for that one, as we do have, there is kind of that connection, and, we will kind of, I think, either way, we'll kind of address it or kind of, make a mention of it in property and evidence, if we kind of do this one, shortly after, kind of at the same time, or kind of a little bit after. I think this one too, this one has more interactions across the police department, kind of some of those different management teams as well are kind of responsible. And I think too, just kind of with that, with property and evidence too, we kind of do anticipate, there is that police officer, that investigator connection. For example, investigators are the ones, sign off items that can be disposed, or that, items that can be released to kind of whoever they belong to. So I think, we will, as we kind of get to scoping, we do anticipate, there will be kind of spin-offs or areas that we may come back to and kind of, request, for a more targeted assessment that way. So I think the general sense is stay tuned, but we do kind of have this, hopefully this project at least, very least in the near future, so.
Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question about the officer injured on duty, and more when it says including how injuries to officers occur. I think we know when we I think we alluded to this earlier, that mental health, being overworked, that can also cause, or be a cause of an injury, or be part of why someone gets injured on job. So I'm just wondering if some of those underlining issues will also be part of this assessment. I mean, versus just like, oh, someone tripped over a piece of carpet. Is there other underlining issues that are occurring, and how do we actually assess that too, and address those issues?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Koski, good question and kind of good. I think too, that is kind of the intent of this, kind of to see, be able to kind of dig a little deeper, at least kind of see at the first lens, see if there is the data out there that can kind of tell us or kind of point us, for example, that these are the reasons or these are the stuff, and then kind of, beyond that, be able to kind of dig down a little deeper and kind of look at, the causes and some of those root causes and, those correlations. I think the first piece would kind of, is going to be getting the data or getting the data, making sure it exists, and kind of seeing how it is, what we can see from that and from the trends, and then, over, as part of this assessment, looking a little deeper into a lot of those root causes, and having some of those, bring to light, or kind of, at least kind of raising awareness, or kind of trying to find, how things interact that way, so.
Mr. Com, we have a lot of people in this space, right? As you keep mentioning, the Department of Human Rights, the DOJ, prospectively, the follow-ups from the after-action review. What made you choose officers injured on duty versus, say, BCR responders who are also overworked, or firefighters who are also overworked and coming up with a lot of injuries that are used to, that are about overwork?
Chair Palmisano, good question. I think just kind of some key things that we look at, in terms of, the impact and kind of the what kind of we're hearing. I think, just in general, there is a lot of officers, that are out. There's a, officer shortage kind of that way. There is kind of a lot of officers that are injured, have been injured. I think, looking at some of these other areas, we did kind of, for example, talk a bit with the fire department, for example, about their mental health program. They do mention, there is kind of some plans, there is kind of some work kind of being that way, but it is kind of it's in early stages. Similarly, I think, some of these other efforts and programs, for these evaluations, we do kind of look at, the maturity of what we can audit, or kind of, maturity of these programs or audits. And I think, a lot of these ones are in kind of their initial infancy stages, or kind of in their stages yet that we kind of can't quite get to it. I think, this one is looking at the data, and then I think, in terms of there is those connections, of course, to these programs that, we do, if we do, as we kind of do begin more discussions, kind of look at, some of these causes and kind of look at how these are operating, will come back, or, can come back and kind of, do a more targeted kind of review, for example, of the BCR, kind of some of these other, fire department. But I think, some of these ones, we do, even like the police department, for example, their early intervention system, some of these other ones are very young and kind of in the infancy stages that are just kind of hard for audit to come in and be able to, look at that way, so.
Yeah, I just want to press on Councilmember Koski's earlier point that mental health and the way that it builds up over time and the kind of trauma is something that we have firsthand seen at a fire department in the last couple of weeks, and that we are seeing, especially with burnout in 911. Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think you actually started speaking to what my question was going to be. It's going to be a category question of, we've seen just on City Council a tremendous number of PTSD claims come through, and I would probably categorize that as an injury as well. And then how do we suss out that distinction between, somebody who twisted their ankle on a foot chase versus somebody who's claiming PTSD from the uprising of 2020. And I think if we categorize them all as kind of injury, we might not be learning the lessons that we need to learn and having the right interventions that we would need to take to make sure that people are safe. But that was just a thought that came to mind as we're kind of speaking broadly about injury.
Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, Chair, Madam Chair. And just to kind of, I guess, layer onto this, I guess I would ask our committee to maybe challenge ourselves, and I'm not sure actually the formal process of this, but to think about this one a little bit more broadly, because I do feel that, I was part of the work, and I'm very grateful. I was part of the work to make sure that we do have these roles here, and I think it was to make sure that we are really looking specifically, but also really thinking about beyond policing as well. And I understand that we have a high risk, and that might be what the data shows us. But to the point of really kind of piecemealing out how do we really define what injury means, and then really looking, I've done a sit-along with our 911 dispatchers. I have done a ride-along with our behavioral response. I've been with MPD. I've been with fire. So I think that this, this really is, I guess I'm challenging us to maybe think about this a little bit more broadly, yet I understand that we also want to have specific information, but I think that this really affects all of community safety. And so, and what our constituents see and feel is what really, at the end of the day, what they're coming to us to talk about. And I think there's more than just MPD here. I think that we can challenge ourselves to look at this a little bit more broadly.
We can just take this in as feedback. And I want to acknowledge, too, this is our first work plan for this specific community safety plan audit. So like you said in the very beginning, it might change or take shape in different ways over time, and I think that's just what you're hearing right now.
Yeah, Chair Palmisano, as a committee, great feedback, and think, as we talk about communication, kind of, willing to, see where kind of, talked earlier about, the kind of the coming of the risk assessment, and I think, this one is intended, or was kind of intended to be kind of more that broad and kind of that leaping kind of the jumping stone into kind of more of these, some of these topics, and I think, be something to consider, and I think, expand upon, come back as we come in future assessments, talking more about just beyond officers and injured on duty. But I think, that was just kind of the one that, we had some, through our discussions and through our areas we kind of focused on, but, we definitely are aware and we'll take, consideration, a lot of these other injuries and other things as well across the organization. I think, too, this kind of came out of a question, too, of like how does the city define injuries on duty? As we're talking about, PTSD, versus a foot chase or some of that stuff, and that was kind of, too, looking at the data initially, just kind of how it's organized and factured, and kind of seeing what we can kind of distill from that, and if there is a distinction that way or if there's not. So, but yeah, thank you for the feedback, that input, and yeah, we will. I think we can, in future updates, and through other conversations, open to, kind of expanding this or kind of, seeing where this kind of, at least this kind of area, I think at the very least, it's just kind of this area of this data and injuries on duty across your enterprise take us. So.
Thank you.
So next kind of a couple of projects are ones that are connected by audit. We kind of intend to connected by our partners. So these are kind of our IT consultants that we've worked with or kind of that we do. And this first one is kind of this is the year for MPD due to the biannual license plate reader and body-worn camera audit. This is the one that is through the state, or the audit objective is kind of set by the state. It's required every 2 years. And we have had Wildcard, our consultant, kind of do this the last couple, or build these relationships, kind of work with them. This one is kind of in the works. We have, started talking with the consultant and kind of talking with management. We do, I think, have a tentative report date of sometime, in August or September at least, if kind of things go according to plan that way. So this kind of that routine one. This one, as we're looking at 2024, it's the park board next year. So we just kind of added this on as a recognition and awareness that, we will be going back, in a year talking about the park police and the biannual project. This next one is a raid to a PIMS IT audit follow-up. So that is that PIMS IT audit report from the 2018 and engaging with a consultant to look more specifically at the comments and information, or looking at more specifically at the recommendations and the observations from that report and being able to close those out and how that fits into how things are currently operating. And then this kind of next one is kind of a jumping ground off of our current work and kind of a previous work in 911 ICE MEC cybersecurity audit. So back in 2021, I believe we did a consultation of kind of control cybersecurity program or systems related to MECC 911, kind of came up with a number of recommendations. One of them number of recommendations and kind of, in that consultation format. We kind of are doing this 911 MECC, looking at the contracts and intergovernmental relationships one as kind of part of this one. And then we do want to kind of close the loop with kind of doing an actual audit conducted by our cybersecurity partners of kind of this MECC 911 environment, just because it is, as you talked earlier, high risk, high control is critical function of the city. So that is one that we hope to work with our consultants on that one as well.
I just want to mention in general, MECC means 911, correct?
Yes.
So earlier when you spoke about MECC and that audit, we're talking about 911 and dispatch and how all of that works.
Yep, yeah, 911 emergency operation, Minneapolis emergency, that one, yeah, they're one and the same essentially, just kind of that emergency command center is kind of referred to as 911 as they kind of are, that one, so. And I think, before we kind of talk about, asking for approval of the plan or kind of comments on that one, I just kind of want to talk about, community safety auditing, kind of what we kind of, as we build this out, kind of what is to come, kind of in the future and kind of where we're going that way. So, we do, as part of the audit and kind of this one, regular updates to the audit committee, hoping to start work on the products described, keeping those communication channels open, staying aware of changes, assessing how things kind of progress with MDHR, DOJ, and other environments. And I think too, talking more about, talking, for example, we were talking earlier about, a question about kind of complaints, some of the other data, over time, through the coming months and other years, throughout the coming months, kind of into next year, as we do these projects, have these conversations, and kind of elsewhere, kind of, being able to drill down deeper and, look at where, as committee member Fisher was kind of talking about earlier, complaints, some of that other information, and being able to use that in future work that way. So that's kind of where we do intend to go as we kind of build out this function and keep going from there. So.
Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you to all of you. As we alluded to, this is very new. So I'm very impressed with how quickly you've been able to work. For those that don't know, this is something that I've worked with and Palmisano has worked on since 2015 in order to get the roles that we are seeing here today. It wasn't in the mayor's budget last year, and all of us on the city council obviously approved and made sure that shift and change. And I think it shows the necessity of this when we see this long list and breaking this out the way that we are and being able to have 2 community safety auditors here today. So I just want to say it's really amazing to see how quickly, this was, we established this in December. You have been hired. You have this, an assessment, a plan, and it, like I said, it shows the necessity of this. And I really look forward to being able to continue to work and hear the updates. And when residents come to me and ask me, they said, we know that, the Office of Community Safety, MPD, Fire do not directly report to you. So, but what are you going to do? This is a tool that we have, understanding this information, working together, supporting. This is our oversight on the legislative side. And I'm just really glad to see that this quick work, and I just really want to commend what you guys have already been able to accomplish in such a short period of time. We talk about the infancy age of a lot of different other programs, but really we are in April, and this was just set in budget in December. So thank you so much for all that you've been able to show us, and I continue, like I said, to continue to look forward to partnering with you.
Councilmember Koski, would you like to move approval of this 2023 risk-based community safety audit plan?
Absolutely. I move to approve. Do I have the technical? Do I need to say the technical term here?
Nope, that's fine.
Okay, perfect.
Second.
Councilmember Payne wishes to second. I think our feedback on this dais is heard and heard strongly, and for that reason, I will reluctantly support getting started this way, but I do think we need to take a more holistic view of not just the connective tissue between these departments, but some of these other departments, given the amount of focus that police have in this space right now. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries, and that motion is approved. Next, we have our regular report of the city auditor. I want to acknowledge we've been here for a while. Is the will of the body to need to take a short break, or should we power on through? I think we're looking to power on through if you are all right with that, Mr. Patrick.
Chair Palmisano, committee members, I know this has been a long meeting. I thought it important to have those two reports run together. It's a lot of information, but it's extremely foundational to the work that we're going to do. As such, I'll move through this pretty quickly. There's not a lot of new information. So our completed and ongoing audit work, first is the IT outage after action review. That project is coming into fruition. That should be done at least for the June audit committee meeting, certainly.
And Mr. Patrick, just to be clear, we are looking to have a May audit committee meeting as well.
Yes.
But you're saying that these would be ready in June, not just at the next one.
Thinking of having new audit committee members and the potential items for discussion at a new, fresh audit committee, perhaps that report might not be best presented as like a first introduction to the work of audit. It's pretty technical, likely could result in a closed session just because it concerns security matters. So that might be better held for the June audit committee meeting.
All right, thanks.
Our revenue and collections audit is in progress and going quite well. It's been certainly an interesting one and yielding fruit. So more to come on that in future meetings. Mr. Com talked about the third-party and intergovernmental relationships consultation for the Minneapolis Emergency Communications Center /911. Work is going well. Our fraud, waste, and abuse investigations, we have 3 in progress. Just want to put one comment out there, and it's a congratulations to Allison Newman, who is our newest certified fraud examiner. It's a challenging designation to get, requires testing, a lot of research and study, and she is now our certified fraud examiner for the department. So congratulations to her.
Congratulations.
And our future fraud, waste, and abuse investigations. So, our audit committee appointment process, it's happening right now. As you mentioned, Chair Palmisano, we will be having a May meeting. You can see the timeline that we've walked through on the slide to appoint now 4 community members to the audit committee. Each application was reviewed by multiple staff to put forth for interviews. The interview panel was comprised of myself, the chair of the audit committee, and the city clerk. Over a 2-week period, interviewed all the candidates, and the panel will identify a list to move forward. So we plan to have that May 22nd organizational meeting of the new audit committee. Our other work in progress, updating the audit charter. It's on track for adoption in Q2. That's something we want the new audit committee to adopt, because that's the marching orders moving forward, so that's relevant for them. So that is on track, and we plan to present that in the next audit committee meeting. I want to talk a bit about our policy and research division. There is a whole nother branch of our office that is new in 2023, and had a variety of objectives. We're onboarding 3 FTEs. Hiring and onboarding. We have 2 FTEs hired, a 3rd FTE is looking for Q3 when we kind of determine the scope of work that we're going to be doing. We're going to be presenting a policy and research division opportunities assessment plan to the audit committee. And this is all wrapped up in the legislative process reform project. That's a joint project between the city clerk's office and the city auditor's office to figure out how this new policy and research work kind of slots into the legislative process as a whole. It's a big process, it's a big, huge project to reshape how the city passes legislation. Bring up one of the 2 new staff working on this project, Jody Molnar-Hansen, a long-term city employee and someone who's been deeply focused on this for some time now. Just kind of talk through some basics briefly about what this legislative process reform project looks like.
Hello.
Welcome, Ms. Molinar-Hansen.
Council Chair Palmisano, committee members. I'm just going to quickly walk you through and give you some highlights on the legislative process reform project. Noted on the slide is the highlight. There's 5 directives within the legislative directive. I just noted number 4 here on the slide because it pertains directly to the Office of City Auditor and the new Division of Policy and Research. As the city auditor mentioned, we're working collaboratively with the Office of City Clerk on this project to bring the legislative process in alignment with the new government structure and to identify what and how the new Policy and Research Division can support that process. We are using the legislative directive update the legislative department update directive that was passed on February 23rd by council. As I noted, there's 5 aspects of that directive that encompass the whole visual that you see in front of you. Our work for number 4 is really focusing on the legislative powers, that figuring out the policymaking and council oversight, and aligning it nicely with the already established audit work that's happening. So what we're doing is we are mapping and visualizing the process and the system around the process that supports it. We're conducting interviews with the council members and key stakeholders. We're about halfway through that process. We're identifying and gathering existing resources. That means the templates, the forms, the existing council policies, and rules that support and also inform the process. And then we're observing the current process and how items are moving through it. And then researching what other government entities are doing, along with then starting to really identify those areas and opportunities for improvement. We are, again, in coordination with the city clerk, on track to present that update of the work to date to the government structure subcommittee meeting of the committee of the whole on May 9th. And with that, I will hand it over back to the city auditor. Thank you.
One more item for the Policy and Research Division. I'm going to ask Andrew Hawkins to come up and describe some of the operational framework analysis that's going on and some of the other items in development from this new division.
Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you. Chair Palmisano, committee members, my name is Andrew Hawkins. I'm here to kind of walk you through quickly some of the operational framework analysis and development efforts that have been undertaken by our group. As we've kind of seen a theme with a lot of this, there's a lot of very new work, but very important work getting started. And so the idea with this is to sort of balance that, kind of building the bike while we're riding it, because there's obviously that need to start getting some, like some of this impactful, pieces in place so that the work can get carried out. The first piece is the completion of a framework for policy case studies. The idea behind like these case studies is essentially to do an analysis of items that have either gone all the way through the legislative process, some items that may not have completed, that journey through the same process, just to see if there's any, I think problematic areas, recurring issues, success stories, and kind of learning from those and kind of looking at how those can be addressed or remediated through some of the changes that are currently underway to the legislative process itself, or just to, I think, future efforts to the policy process. The second piece is a framework for the legislative priorities analysis and assessment. Some of this is sort of guided from the same sort of assessment that's done by Audit. It's different because it's, through the lens of policy, but this would be working with council members to essentially, walk through everybody's legislative priorities, issues that they'd like to see addressed, and then be able to take those items back, identify any trends, patterns, background information that would be available, and then to bring something forward that would hopefully be useful to council members in any work planning that takes place going forward, and to see kind of where there might be some alignment on policy goals, just kind of across the council itself. And then the last piece is the comparative analysis of policy and research structures. So again, the idea behind this is essentially looking at the landscape that currently exists. While policy and research is new to the city of Minneapolis, this function is something that certainly exists across a broad range of counties and municipalities. So I think looking at this, I think there's currently, I've looked at least 10 to 12 cities and what the structures look like, kind of what were some of the pain points with them being stood up, what does their operation currently look like, and sort of borrowing what we can. If we can avoid having to reinvent the wheel, it's obviously a much easier path for us as we're standing this up quickly. So just kind of taking those lessons learned and best practices from that research and applying them as we continue to develop and build out the policy and research division itself. So that was again, a quick recap. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to City Auditor Patrick.
Councilmember Koski. Oh, nope, I'm not seeing any questions.
All right, thank you.
That's a very high-level view of a very important project, but tune in for the May 7th meeting to hear
This is the
about.
fastest run of that I've ever seen, but
I mean, we've been here for a minute, so, yeah, more to come on May 7th. I would tune into that meeting to hear a lot more detail about the work in progress. A last item, prior audit issue follow-up. We have 31 open audit issues. Obviously, the bulk of that relates to the HR audit and 2 audits and the mobile device audit. Those mobile device audit issues are coming due, requiring some more work on the back end to implement enterprise policies, but big updates to come on that in the very near future. I think in very near meetings soon to come in the near future, you'll see a lot of updates on these audit issues and tend to call back some of the people working on them and provide those updates. But nothing major for now. And with that, just want to thank everybody. I know this was a very long meeting. Perhaps now the fact that we have so many staff doing so many different things, we'll have to take a different tactic to some of these, approaching some of these conversations, but I thought it very, very relevant to hear from all the new staff and people who are working on these critical projects. Happy to answer any remaining questions, but otherwise.
thank you. I am not seeing any remaining questions or comments at this time. So I will direct the clerk to receive and file this report. Next, I will ask if there are any announcements. I do have an announcement. I did want to level set with everybody what you and I were talking about briefly about a May meeting. I want to acknowledge that we're in flux as an audit committee, as a body. Our government structure changes the composition of our audit committee a bit. And as Mr. Patrick mentioned, we're in the midst of interviewing the applications for additional community members, and those will go through the council process for this independent oversight body. So we are working toward a May 22nd organizational meeting for the new Constitution of Audit Committee. But mostly I wanted to just express my appreciation and give a huge thank you to my colleagues here for serving so well. And some of this information is dense and some of this information is in audit language. And thank you for sifting through it and seeing it as being so important. Thank you especially to Mr. Fisher for your many years of service on this body. We keep telling you you're not done yet. We'll see come May 22nd if you are or not. Did you want to say a couple words?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I think I've been here 7 years, which is far beyond what would be normal for a citizen member of a committee of this sort. You know, I love this city, as all of us here do. And I've been here for 40 years. I've served on the Minneapolis Civil Rights Commission, the Police Civilian Review Board, CLIC, Charter Commission, and now 7 years on the Audit Committee. And it just makes me more endeared to the city and the hard work that you guys are all doing. Minneapolis has been under some pressure over the recent years. In fact, and all the time I've been here, it's been under pressure. Just different types of pressure. And you always have the staff that stand tall and a council that does the job that the citizens need to have to make this the greatest city, I think, in the world. So thank you for the opportunity to serve.
Thank you. Seeing no further business before us and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Will be sent to you. Download the free Minneapolis 311 app on your smartphone. Several issues can be reported through the app like graffiti, parking violations, potholes, abandoned vehicles, and traffic signal issues. You can also visit our website or send an email.